I had been aboard Sigma orbit for 11 days before I understood why the older species liked building stations in silence. Not literal silence. Sigma orbit never stopped humming. Engines vibrated behind the walls, life support breathed through the vents, and distant ships docked every hour. But beneath it all was the silence of old civilizations that believed they had already seen everything. The Grand Council had gathered again, arguing over Rex Kane and his pirate fleet. They had attacked Elion colonies for months, kidnapping children while the council debated laws and sanctions. When Speaker Holland finally allowed me to speak, I stepped onto the platform. "We are wasting time," I said. "Evacuate the Elion children to Sigma orbit. Humans will protect them." General Craig Vorn of the Draxer laughed. "You?" he asked. "Humans are too soft for real war." I looked at him. "Yes," I said. The chamber went quiet. "We will move the children," I continued. "You can keep debating. Humans will handle the rest." By the time I left the council chamber, the first Elion transport had already arrived at Dock 12. The children came in silence. Most of them were small, pale things wrapped in silver blankets, clutching the hands of exhausted parents or relief workers. The older ones tried to appear brave, but they kept glancing over their shoulders every time the station lights flickered or a security drone passed overhead. They had seen pirate ships descend through the clouds above their homes. They had seen fires. Some of them had seen family members dragged away. Human volunteers met them at the docks. Medical teams, engineers, civilian aid workers, station security officers. We had not come to Sigma orbit expecting a war, but humans had a habit of preparing for bad outcomes even when nobody else thought they were possible. I walked through Dock 12 with 2 station guards behind me, watching as families were moved toward the secured habitation ring beneath the eastern wing of the station. An Elion woman stopped me near the transit gate. She looked exhausted. One side of her face was bruised, and she held a little girl close against her chest. "You are the human ambassador?" she asked softly. "Yes, you said they would be safe here." "They will be." She studied my face for a moment, searching for doubt. I gave her none. She nodded once and continued down the corridor. A few minutes later, my communicator buzzed again. Jake Rivers appeared on the screen from the Bridge of the Liberty. Behind him, red maintenance lights flashed across the command deck. Crew members were moving quickly between stations, carrying weapons cases and emergency kits. "You need to see this," he said. A tactical display replaced his face. 3 red markers had appeared near the outer edge of Sigma orbit's defense perimeter. Then 7 more. Then 20. I felt my stomach tighten. "Scout ships?" I asked. Jake shook his head. "Too big." The display zoomed in. The lead vessel was ugly, black hull plating, reinforced armor, engines modified far beyond safe limits. The kind of ship pirates used when they cared more about intimidation than efficiency. Rex Kane's emblem was painted across the side in white. A broken crown. "He's early," I said. "By about 2 days." "How many ships?" 40 confirmed. More still dropping out of jump. I looked back down the docking corridor. Children, families, medical teams, volunteers. Too many civilians. "Get Liberty clear of the station," I said. "We already are. Full combat readiness." Jake nodded. "Already done." The screen shifted again, this time showing the Liberty itself leaving Sigma orbit's outer ring. The ship was long and angular, its hull painted dark gray with the old Earth defense insignia near the bow. To most species, it looked small. Humans knew better. The Liberty had been built for escort duty, rescue operations, and colonial defense. Officially, it carried enough firepower to deter pirates and protect civilian convoys. "Officially, Jake," I said quietly, "if they breach the station." "I know." His voice stayed calm. "Predator mode." I nodded once. The transmission ended. As I turned back toward the secured sector, station lights suddenly dimmed overhead. Not a failure. A controlled reduction. Emergency shutters began sliding over outer corridors. Security drones detached from charging stations and moved into defensive positions. Human technicians sealed maintenance access points and utility shafts without being told. We had prepared for this long before Kane arrived, because humans knew something the rest of the galaxy never seemed to understand. The difference between kindness and weakness was preparation, and humans had spent thousands of years preparing for monsters. By the time I left the council chamber, the first Elion transport had already arrived at Dock 12. The children came in silence. Most of them were small, pale things wrapped in silver blankets, clutching the hands of exhausted parents or relief workers. The older ones tried to appear brave, but they kept glancing over their shoulders every time the station lights flickered or a security drone passed overhead. They had seen pirate ships descend through the clouds above their homes. They had seen fires. Some of them had seen family members dragged away. Human volunteers met them at the docks. Medical teams, engineers, civilian aid workers, station security officers. We had not come to Sigma orbit expecting a war, but humans had a habit of preparing for bad outcomes even when nobody else thought they were possible. I walked through Dock 12 with 2 station guards behind me, watching as families were moved toward the secured habitation ring beneath the eastern wing of the station. An Elion woman stopped me near the transit gate. She looked exhausted. One side of her face was bruised, and she held a little girl close against her chest. "You are the human ambassador?" she asked softly. "Yes, you said they would be safe here." "They will be." She studied my face for a moment, searching for doubt. I gave her none. She nodded once and continued down the corridor. A few minutes later, my communicator buzzed again. Jake Rivers appeared on the screen from the Bridge of the Liberty. Behind him, red maintenance lights flashed across the command deck. Crew members were moving quickly between stations, carrying weapons cases and emergency kits. "You need to see this," he said. A tactical display replaced his face. 3 red markers had appeared near the outer edge of Sigma orbit's defense perimeter. Then 7 more. Then 20. I felt my stomach tighten. "Scout ships?" I asked. Jake shook his head. "Too big." The display zoomed in. The lead vessel was ugly, black hull plating, reinforced armor, engines modified far beyond safe limits. The kind of ship pirates used when they cared more about intimidation than efficiency. Rex Kane's emblem was painted across the side in white. A broken crown. "He's early," I said. "By about 2 days." "How many ships?" 40 confirmed. More still dropping out of jump. I looked back down the docking corridor. Children, families, medical teams, volunteers, too many civilians. "Get Liberty clear of the station," I said. "We already are. Full combat readiness." Jake nodded. "Already done." The screen shifted again, this time showing the Liberty itself leaving Sigma orbit's outer ring. The ship was long and angular, its hull painted dark gray with the old Earth defense insignia near the bow. To most species, it looked small. Humans knew better. The Liberty had been built for escort duty, rescue operations, and colonial defense. Officially, it carried enough firepower to deter pirates and protect civilian convoys. "Officially, Jake," I said quietly, "if they breach the station." "I know." His voice stayed calm. "Predator mode." I nodded once. The transmission ended. As I turned back toward the secured sector, station lights suddenly dimmed overhead. Not a failure. A controlled reduction. Emergency shutters began sliding over outer corridors. Security drones detached from charging stations and moved into defensive positions. Human technicians sealed maintenance access points and utility shafts without being told. We had prepared for this long before Kane arrived, because humans knew something the rest of the galaxy never seemed to understand. The difference between kindness and weakness was preparation, and humans had spent thousands of years preparing for monsters. The council chamber dissolved into panic the moment Rex Kane's fleet appeared on the outer sensors. Delegates who had laughed at me less than an hour earlier were suddenly shouting over each other, demanding military responses, emergency sessions, and security guarantees for their own delegations. The chamber that had seemed ancient and dignified only minutes before now looked like what it really was, a room full of frightened politicians. General Vorn was standing near the central platform, barking orders into a communicator. The Draxer fleet can arrive in 30 hours, one of his officers reported. 30 hours? Vorn snapped. The station may not last 30 minutes. Speaker Holland struck the floor repeatedly with his staff, trying and failing to restore order. I ignored all of them. My communicator buzzed again as I crossed the upper transit corridor. Sarah, Jake said the moment I answered. Kane's broadcasting. A second later, the pirate leader's image filled the screen. Rex Kane looked exactly the way every pirate king in history had looked. Scarred face, shaved head, heavy combat coat covered in trophies and insignia taken from dead enemies. One eye replaced with a glowing red implant. He smiled when he spoke. "Attention Sigma Orbit," he said. "You are currently surrounded by the free fleet of Rex Kane. You have something that belongs to me." His voice carried through every public speaker on the station. "The Elion children will be transferred to my custody immediately. In exchange, I will allow the station to survive." Around me, civilians stopped walking. Security teams looked toward the ceiling speakers. The children in the secured sector heard it too. Kane kept smiling. "If you refuse, I will board the station, kill everyone who resists, and take the children anyway." The transmission ended. For a few seconds, the entire station seemed to hold its breath. Then the panic started. Delegates rushed for private shelters. Civilian crews flooded the corridors. Security officers tried to lock down sections of the station while thousands of frightened people pushed toward transit gates and emergency bunkers. I kept walking. When I reached the secured sector, human volunteers were already moving the children deeper inside the station. An old medical wing beneath the eastern habitation ring. Forgotten corridors, storage rooms, backup life support systems. Nobody on the council even remembered it existed. A human engineer named Patel met me outside the security doors. "We've moved half already," he said. "The rest are on the way." "Good." He lowered his voice. "We found 2 unauthorized access requests to the original shelter coordinates." I stopped. "From who?" "Council security accounts." "Compromised?" "Looks that way." I nodded once. There was a traitor. I had expected one. "Keep moving the children," I said. "Nobody outside this corridor gets the new location." Patel nodded and disappeared back through the doors. A moment later, the station lights went out. Not everywhere, just this section. Darkness flooded the corridor. Emergency strips glowed faintly along the floor, casting long red shadows across the walls. Then came the smoke. White vapor poured from ceiling vents, thick enough to reduce visibility to a few meters. I had activated it remotely from my wrist pad. Motion sensors, thermal dampeners, false life signs, locked blast doors. Every trap humans had quietly installed over the last 6 hours came online at once. My communicator buzzed. "Boarding ships incoming," Jake said. "Multiple vectors." "How long?" 5 minutes. "And the Liberty?" "We're engaging." I heard the first distant impacts through the station hull. Low, heavy vibrations that rolled through the walls beneath my feet. Somewhere outside, the Liberty had begun firing. I closed my eyes for a moment. Then I reached into the emergency locker mounted beside the corridor door and removed a compact black case. Inside was a combat harness, a pulse pistol, 2 knives, and a small injector marked with a red stripe. Predator mode. Humans had never shared the details with the Council. Enhanced reaction speed, pain suppression, controlled adrenal overload, temporary muscular amplification. Dangerous, difficult to survive if overused. Effective. I loaded the pistol. Far away, somewhere beyond the station walls, I heard the deep sound of battle beginning. The first pirate boarding teams entered Sigma orbit through Dock 9. They cut through the outer airlocks with plasma torches and explosive charges, flooding into the station in black armor and sealed helmets. Most were mercenaries from ruined systems and dead colonies, humans and aliens alike. The kind of people who followed Rex Kane only because he paid well and never asked unnecessary questions. They expected panic. Instead, they found darkness. Emergency lights flickered along the floors of the narrow corridors. Smoke hung in the air so thick that even thermal scanners began to fail. Motion sensors our engineers had installed only hours earlier projected false signals deeper into the empty passageways. The pirates split into smaller groups and moved in different directions, chasing targets that did not exist. I watched the first team from a maintenance shaft near the ceiling. 5 of them, 2 with assault rifles, 1 with a scanner. The scanner kept giving conflicting readings. Movement ahead, one of them said. No, left, another answered. They turned into a side corridor. The floor collapsed beneath them. Not very far, only a couple of meters into a service trench. But it was enough. One pirate fell directly in front of an automated turret hidden inside the wall. The turret fired once. All that remained of him were fragments of armor and blood on the floor. The others opened fire immediately. They shot into the smoke, into the walls, into their own shadows. I dropped down behind them. The first one did not turn fast enough. The knife went into his throat before he could raise his weapon. The second managed half a turn. I shot him through the visor. The third started firing blindly and hit the ceiling. I broke his arm, tore the rifle from his hands, and shot the fourth pirate as he tried to climb out of the trench. The fifth ran. I let him. Fear spreads faster than blood. My communicator crackled. Sarah, Jake said through static, we've destroyed 6 ships. I kept moving down the corridor, stepping over bodies. How bad is it? They came in earlier and heavier than we expected. Behind his voice I could hear alarms, impacts against the hull, and distant explosions aboard the Liberty. The ship was already in close combat. Human ships were built differently from Council vessels. Other civilizations preferred elegant formations, long-range exchanges, and rigid battle plans. Humans preferred ugly fights. The Liberty had already pushed directly into the center of Kane's formation, using its smaller size and higher speed to stay below the firing arcs of the larger pirate cruisers. Boarding torpedoes are heading for the station, Jake said. Can you stop them? Most of them. Most. That meant some would still get through. I turned the corner and stopped. 3 station guards were dead against the wall. A fourth was still alive. Barely. He looked at me through blood-covered fingers. They knew where to go, he whispered. They knew the shelter coordinates. The traitor. I crouched beside him. Who? Council security. One of the delegates. He stopped speaking. Forever. I stood up. Somewhere ahead, deeper in the maintenance corridors, gunfire echoed through the station. The pirates had already reached the old shelter. Good. There were no children there. Only empty rooms, sealed blast doors, and enough automated traps to make them believe they had found the right place. I brought up the station map on my display. Red markers spread across the eastern sector. More pirate teams. More false signals. More traps. Then another warning appeared. Unauthorized access. Origin point. Corridor leading to the council chamber. I started running. By the time I reached the chamber, it was almost empty. Most of the delegates had already fled to bunkers or evacuation ships. The enormous circular hall, which only hours earlier had felt full of arrogance and certainty, now looked cold and abandoned. Only a few people remained. General Vorn stood near the central platform with a rifle in his hands. 2 dead pirates lay near the entrance. He looked at me. About time, he growled. You stayed? He reloaded the weapon. I wanted to see if humans are really as soft as everyone says. At that moment, the doors began to open. Pirates were coming inside. Vorn raised the rifle. I drew my pistol, and for the first time since the battle began, the Draxer general smiled. The doors slid open fully. 10 pirates entered the chamber first. They came in low and fast, rifles raised, flashlights cutting through the smoke in sharp white beams. They expected frightened politicians hiding behind benches and ceremonial platforms. Instead, they found General Vorn and me standing in the center of the chamber waiting for them. Vorn fired first. His rifle thundered through the hall. The first pirate disappeared in a burst of blood and shattered armor. The second lost half his chest. The others scattered immediately, diving behind the curved delicate platforms as pieces of crystal and stone exploded around them. I moved left. One pirate saw me and swung his rifle toward my head. I shot him twice before he could fire. Another appeared through the smoke near the central platform. I drove the knife into his side, twisted, and shoved him down the steps. The chamber filled with gunfire. Vorn fought like a machine built for one purpose. Every shot from his rifle killed someone. When the weapon finally ran dry, he used it as a club, smashing the stock into a pirate's helmet hard enough to break both. A pirate grenade landed near my feet. I kicked it across the chamber. The explosion tore apart 3 attackers and collapsed part of the western balcony. The smoke thickened. Alarms echoed through the station. More footsteps were coming. I ducked behind one of the delegate benches and checked the pistol. 4 rounds left. Not enough. Vorn crouched behind the opposite side of the chamber, reloading with movements that looked almost calm. How many? He shouted. At least 20 more. Good. I almost smiled. That was when my communicator activated again. Jake's face appeared for only a second before static swallowed the image. We lost port shields, he said. 3 pirate cruisers broke through. Liberty's taking heavy damage. Behind him I could hear warning sirens and the sound of metal tearing somewhere deep inside the ship. How long can you hold? Long enough. A violent impact shook the station. Dust drifted from the ceiling. The chamber lights flickered again. Then Jake spoke one last sentence before the transmission died. Sarah, Kane's ship is moving toward Dock 3. I froze for half a second. Dock 3 was on the opposite side of the station. Closer to the old medical sector. Closer to the children. The traitor had told Kane where to look, but not where to stop looking. I rose from cover and shot another pirate through the throat. Vorn, I shouted, hold this room. He tore a fallen rifle from a dead pirate's hands. You leaving? I have somewhere else to be. He looked at me for a second. Then he nodded once. Go, he said. I'll keep them busy. I ran. The corridors outside the chamber were worse now. Bodies everywhere. Pirates. Station guards. Council security. Smoke rolled through the halls in thick waves. Emergency lights flashed red against blood-covered walls. Somewhere above me, automatic turrets were still firing in short controlled bursts. I passed a dead pirate with a council security badge in his hand. The traitor had opened doors for them, but the station was too large, too damaged, and too full of human traps for the pirates to move quickly. As I turned into the lower eastern corridor, I heard voices ahead. Pirates. 5 of them. One was carrying a portable scanner. It's here, he said. Hidden sector. Medical wing. They had found the old access route. I pulled the injector from my belt. Small glass tube. Red stripe. Predator mode. For a moment I looked at it in my hand. Humans did not use it lightly. The body could survive incredible things when the mind stopped holding it back. Pain disappeared. Fear disappeared. Limits disappeared. I pressed the injector against my arm. The liquid burned all the way into my bloodstream. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then the world slowed down. The smoke became clearer. The sounds sharper. My heartbeat steadier. Ahead of me, the pirates were still moving toward the children. I drew the knife. Then I stepped into the corridor after them. Predator mode did not feel like rage. Rage was messy. This was clarity. The pain in my shoulder disappeared first. Then the ache in my legs. My breathing slowed. My vision sharpened until I could see tiny details through the smoke ahead of me. Scratches in the corridor walls. Drops of blood on the floor. The faint glow of heat leaking through pirate armor joints. 5 pirates. 2 in front. 3 behind. The one carrying the scanner was in the center. They were moving carefully now, weapons raised, expecting resistance. They still expected resistance to look like fear. I stepped out of the smoke behind them. The last pirate turned first. Too slow. I caught the rifle barrel with one hand, shoved it aside, and drove the knife into the gap beneath his helmet. Before his body hit the floor, I had already fired twice. The nearest pirate spun toward me. The first shot took him in the visor. The second pirate tried to shout a warning. I shot him through the mouth. The scanner operator dropped to one knee and fired wildly down the corridor. The rounds sparked off the walls around me. I moved forward through them. Fast, closer than he expected. The knife went into his chest. I tore the scanner from his hands and threw it into the wall hard enough to shatter it. The final pirate ran. I chased him. He made it almost 20 meters before I caught him near the medical sector blast door. He turned with a pistol in his hands, panic visible even through the helmet visor. "Please," he said. I hit him hard enough to break his jaw. Then I took his access card and opened the blast door. Inside, the old medical wing was silent. Human volunteers stood behind overturned beds and supply crates with rifles in their hands. Parents huddled against the walls with their children. The younger Elions stared at me with wide, pale eyes. One little girl stepped forward from behind her mother. "You came back," she whispered. I looked down at her. Of course. Behind me, distant gunfire echoed through the station. The battle was still spreading. A human engineer named Patel hurried toward me carrying a tablet. "We found the traitor," he said. "Who?" He handed me the screen. Counselor Merrick of the Talon Syndics. One of the senior delegates. He had been feeding station maps and security codes to Kane for hours. "Where is he now?" I asked. "Trying to reach Dock 3. He's running." Patel nodded. "He knows Kane is losing." I looked around the medical wing. At the children. At the frightened parents. At the volunteers standing between them and the door. "Seal this sector," I said. "Nobody gets in except humans." Patel nodded and started shouting orders. I turned and ran back into the corridor. The station shook again. Harder this time. My communicator flickered. Jake appeared for a moment through static and warning lights. His face was covered in blood. Not his own. "We got Kane's cruiser," he said. "You destroyed it?" "Not yet." Behind him I heard someone screaming damage reports across the bridge. "We crippled his engines. He's trying to dock with the station." "Where?" "Dock 3. Exactly where I expected." "Jake," I said quietly, "how bad is the Liberty?" He looked over his shoulder for a second. Then back at me. "We'll survive." That was not the same thing as winning. The transmission died again. I kept moving. Ahead of me, emergency shutters were closing section by section. Smoke poured from the ceiling vents. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear pirates retreating through the corridors. They had come to Sigma orbit expecting civilians, diplomats, and frightened prey. Instead they had found humans. And humans, when protecting children, were the closest thing the galaxy had ever seen to monsters. I found Counselor Merrick near Dock 3. He was not alone. 4 pirates in black armor surrounded him as they moved through the shattered docking corridor toward Kane's cruiser. The dock had been hid during the fighting. Half the ceiling had collapsed inward, leaving twisted metal beams hanging over burning cargo crates and ruptured fuel lines. Emergency lights flashed red through the smoke. Merrick saw me first. For a moment, his face showed relief. Then he saw the pistol in my hand. "You don't understand," he said quickly. I had no choice. The pirates raised their weapons. I shot the first one before he could fire. The second pirate turned toward me, but Predator mode still held the world in slow motion. I saw the movement before he finished it. I shot him through the throat and dropped behind a cargo loader as rifle rounds tore through the air above me. Merrick screamed. The third pirate moved toward him, grabbing the counselor by the shoulder and dragging him toward Kane's ship. The fourth pirate threw a grenade. I saw it bounce across the deck. Too close. I grabbed Merrick and slammed both of us behind the cargo loader a second before the explosion ripped through the corridor. Heat rolled over us. Metal fragments struck the walls. Merrick was shaking. "You saved me," he whispered. I looked at him. "No," I said. "I needed you alive." The surviving pirates were still moving through the smoke. One rushed forward blindly. I shot him twice through the chest. The last one ran for the cruiser. I let him go. Merrick tried to stand. I shoved him back down. "Why?" he asked. Why are you protecting them? They aren't even human. For the first time since the battle began, I felt something close to anger. Because they're children. He stared at me as though that answer made no sense. Maybe to him, it didn't. The docking bay doors were still open. Beyond them, Kane's cruiser hung against the stars with half its engines burning and long tears across the hole where the Liberty had torn into it. Smaller pirate ships were already breaking away from the battle and retreating. They knew they were losing. Then Kane himself stepped through the smoke. He was larger than I expected. Heavy combat armor, mechanical right arm, a long coat blackened by smoke and engine grease. One side of his face was covered in burn scars. He carried a pulse rifle in one hand. Human, he said. His voice was calm. Behind him, more pirates spread out across the dock. I counted 8. Too many for a straight fight. Kane looked at Merrick. So you were the traitor, he said. Merrick swallowed hard. You promised. Kane shot him in the head. The body collapsed beside me. For a second, nobody moved. Then Kane looked back at me. You should have given me the children, he said. This station would still be standing. I raised the pistol. You were always going to kill everyone. He smiled slightly. Yes. The pirates opened fire. I dropped behind cover as pulse rounds tore through the cargo loader. One struck my shoulder hard enough to spin me sideways. Predator mode killed the pain before it reached me. I came up firing. One pirate fell, then another. The rest spread out, moving toward me from both sides. Kane stayed where he was, watching, testing. He wanted to see what humans really were. The corridor behind me shook with heavy footsteps. General Vorn emerged from the smoke carrying a rifle in one hand and a blood-covered combat axe in the other. His armor was cracked. One of his horns was broken off. He looked at Kane and grinned. Sorry I'm late, he said. Then he charged. The dock exploded into violence. Vorn crashed into the nearest pirate hard enough to break him in half. I shot another through the visor. Kane raised his rifle and fired at Vorn, but the Draxer general kept moving even after the shot tore through his shoulder. For the first time, Kane stopped smiling. He was beginning to understand. Humans were not the only predators on Sigma orbit tonight. But we were the worst. Kane moved first. He dropped the ruined rifle, drew a heavy pistol from beneath his coat, and fired twice at Vorn. The shots hit the Draxer general in the chest, but his armor absorbed most of the impact. He kept coming anyway. Vorn swung the combat axe in a brutal overhead arc. Kane stepped back just in time. The blade crashed into the metal floor hard enough to split it open. The nearest pirate turned toward me. I shot him through the side of the head. Another rushed forward with a knife. He was fast. Predator mode was faster. I caught his wrist, twisted until the bone snapped, and drove my blade up beneath his ribs. He collapsed against me, blood spilling down the front of my armor. Across the dock, Kane and Vorn crashed into each other. Kane was stronger than he looked. The mechanical arm let him stop the axe mid-swing and throw Vorn sideways into a damaged cargo crate. The crate exploded apart in a shower of metal and sparks. For a moment, the two of them disappeared into the smoke. Then Kane came out first. He saw me, raised the pistol, and fired. The round hit my side. Even through Predator mode, I felt it. A hard impact, heat, then numbness. I dropped behind cover as more shots tore into the wall above me. Sarah, Vorn shouted. I looked up just in time to see Kane driving a knife into the Draxer general's shoulder. Vorn roared and slammed his head forward, breaking Kane's nose. The pirate leader stumbled back. That was the first time he looked afraid. Not much, just enough. I pushed myself up and fired the last rounds in the pistol. One hit Kane in the leg. The other struck his mechanical arm and blew apart part of the elbow joint. He staggered. Vorn hit him again. The axe handle smashed into Kane's chest hard enough to send him crashing against the side of his own ship. The remaining pirates started retreating immediately. They could see it now. Their leader was losing. Outside the dock, more pirate ships were breaking away from the battle around Sigma orbit. The Liberty had turned the space beyond the station into burning wreckage and drifting debris. What had started as an attack was turning into a rout. Kane looked around once, at the fleeing ships, at the dead pirates, at me and Vorn still standing. Then he laughed. It was not a sane sound. "You humans," he said quietly. "You hide it well." Blood ran from his mouth. "You smile. You talk about peace. You pretend to be civilized." He looked at me. "But you're worse than we are." "No," I said. "We're better." He laughed again and reached for something on his belt. A detonator. I saw it instantly. So did Vorn. Kane pressed the trigger. Nothing happened. For the first time, real confusion crossed his face. I held up my wrist display. "Human engineers," I said. "We shut down your signal frequencies an hour ago." Kane stared at me, then at the dead control unit in his hand. For a long second, nobody moved. Then Vorn stepped forward and buried the axe in Kane's chest. The pirate leader looked down at the blade, then back at us. Then he fell. The dock went quiet. Only distant alarms and the sound of burning metal remained. Vorn leaned heavily on the axe handle. Blood ran down one side of his face. "You know," he said, breathing hard, "I think I may have underestimated humans. You're not the only one." Station security teams finally arrived a few minutes later. Human volunteers, Draxer soldiers, council guards who had decided it was safe to come back now that the shooting was mostly over. They looked at the bodies across the dock, then at me, then at Vorn. Nobody said anything. Far beyond the shattered docking bay, pirate ships continued to flee into deep space. And for the first time since the attack began, Sigma Orbit was still standing. The official investigation began 12 hours later. By then the fires were out, the dead had been counted, and most of the surviving delegates had returned from their bunkers pretending they had never fled in the first place. Sigma Orbit looked wounded. Entire corridors had been burned black. Dock 3 was half gone. The council chamber had lost one balcony, 2 support arches, and most of the eastern wall. Emergency crews moved through the station constantly, carrying stretchers, welding broken bulkheads shut, dragging pirate bodies toward airlocks. I sat in a medical room with my left arm wrapped in bandages and watched the station through the window. Predator mode had worn off 2 hours earlier. Now the pain had arrived. Every bruise, every cut, every bullet impact had come back all at once. A doctor had tried to convince me to sleep. I told him no. Someone knocked softly against the open door. General Vorn stepped inside. His right arm was in a sling. One side of his face had been stitched together badly enough that even Draxer medics had given up trying to make it look normal. He stood in the doorway for a moment. Then he looked around the room. "No guards?" he asked. I didn't think I needed them. He gave a low grunt that might have been approval. For a while neither of us said anything. Outside the window, repair drones moved slowly across the damaged outer hull of the station. Finally Vorn spoke. "How many humans died?" 23, I said. He nodded once. Draxer lost 41. I looked at him. "You stayed." He leaned against the wall carefully. I almost didn't. That surprised me. He noticed. "When Kane's ships appeared, I thought about leaving with the others," he said. The council chamber was collapsing. Pirates were inside the station. And I thought perhaps the humans had been fools after all. He paused. "Then I watched you walk into the smoke by yourself." I said nothing. Vorn looked down at his injured hand. "I have fought in 12 wars," he said quietly. "I have seen species break under less pressure than that. But humans..." He stopped. "You kept moving." The room was silent for a moment. Then he looked at me again. "You were right about one thing." "What?" "The difference between kindness and weakness." I waited. "You are kind," he said. "But only because you are dangerous enough to choose when not to be." That was the closest thing to respect I was ever going to get from him. A few hours later, the council reconvened. The chamber was damaged, half dark, and still smelled faintly of smoke, but every delegation attended. This time, when I entered, nobody laughed. Nobody smiled. Nobody looked away. Speaker Holland stood slowly at the center platform. The pirate fleet of Rex Kane has been destroyed, he announced. Sigma orbit remains secure. The Elion children are alive. He looked toward me. Because of humanity. The silence that followed felt different from the silence before the battle. Before, it had been arrogance. Now it was caution. Councillor Merrick's treason had already been exposed. His communications with Kane had been displayed publicly across the chamber. Several delegates demanded investigations into their own security networks. Others demanded military alliances with Earth. The Elion delegation asked for permanent human protection ships near their colonies. The Draxer asked for joint military exercises. Even the oldest species in the chamber had stopped speaking about humans as if we were children. They had seen too much. When the session ended, I remained alone in the chamber for a few minutes. The lights were dim. Repair crews were already working above the broken balcony. Beyond the great station windows, the wreckage of Kane's fleet drifted silently through space. My communicator buzzed one last time. Jake Rivers. He looked exhausted. Liberty will survive, he said. I smiled faintly. Told you. He glanced away from the camera for a second. Sarah, he said quietly, the galaxy's going to look at us differently after this. Yes. Are you worried about that? I looked out at the stars beyond Sigma orbit. No, I said. Maybe they should be. 3 weeks after the attack, Sigma orbit was operational again. Not completely. Dock 3 still remained sealed behind heavy armored bulkheads while repair crews cut the wreckage of Kane's cruiser apart piece by piece. Many sectors of the eastern habitation ring still smelled of smoke, burning metal, and melted wiring. The council chamber had only been repaired enough to function again. One side of the ceiling remained hidden behind scaffolding, and several of the old crystal banners had been replaced with plain metal panels. But the station was alive. Ships were arriving and departing again. Trade routes had reopened. Delegations had returned to their meetings, arguments, and endless negotiations. Only now, whenever a human walked through the corridors, everyone moved aside. I noticed it near the transit elevators. 2 Draxer officers stepped aside the moment they saw me. A few weeks earlier, they would have expected me to move for them. The same thing happened in the market sector. Then near the council chamber. Then everywhere. Nobody said anything. They simply stepped aside. The Elion children were still aboard the station while their colonies were rebuilt after the pirate attacks. Humans had turned an old cargo sector into a temporary school and shelter. The walls were now covered in bright murals. One of the engineers had even managed to convince station administration to install a small artificial garden beneath the observation dome. I went there on my final day before returning to Earth. When I arrived, the children were playing among the trees and artificial streams. Several of them ran toward me immediately. One small Elion girl handed me a drawing. It showed Sigma orbit, the Liberty, and a very strange version of me holding an enormous rifle. You forgot the smoke, I told her. She smiled. And the explosions. I don't like explosions, she said. Neither do I. That was not entirely true. Nearby, the parents sat on benches. Some still looked exhausted. Many still looked frightened, but not the way they had before. One Elion father approached me near the garden wall. We leave tomorrow, he said. I nodded. Your colonies are protected again. Because of you. Because of many people. He looked toward his daughter playing with the others. In our language, he said quietly, there is a word for those who stand between children and monsters. I looked at him. We do not have an exact translation. But the closest word would be guardian. I did not know what to say. So I said nothing. Later that day, the council gathered again. The chamber was full. This time, when Speaker Holland asked for silence, nobody interrupted him. The pirate fleets in the Perseus corridor have collapsed, he announced. Since the destruction of Rex Kane's forces, 13 independent pirate groups have withdrawn from council space. A quiet murmur spread through the chamber. New reports appeared above the central platform. Human patrols escorting refugee convoys. Human instructors training colonial militias. Human ships appearing in sectors that had spent centuries begging the Council for help and receiving only promises. The Draxxer military has formally requested a defensive alliance with Earth, Holland continued. The Elion delegation has requested human ships near their worlds. The Talon Syndics have issued an official apology for the actions of Councillor Merrick. Nobody called humans weak anymore. Nobody spoke about us like children. General Vorn stood near the center platform in full ceremonial armor. When Holland finished, Vorn stepped forward. Before this attack, I believed humanity was weak, he said. The chamber became silent. I thought they spoke too much about peace because they were afraid of war. He looked directly at me. I was wrong. Then he placed a hand against his chest in the old Draxxer salute. A gesture they reserved only for warriors they truly respected. One by one, other delegates repeated it. Not all of them, but enough. When the session ended, I left the chamber alone. Outside the station windows, repair ships drifted slowly through space. Far beyond them, near the edge of the transport lanes, the wreckage of Kane's fleet still floated in silence. The Liberty was already preparing for departure. New orders had arrived from Earth. New patrols, new escorts, new requests for help. The galaxy was changing, not because humans had conquered it, but because everyone now knew what happened when humanity decided to protect someone. Especially children. The Liberty left Sigma orbit 2 days later. I stood on the bridge beside Jake Rivers as the station shrank behind us into a field of silver lights and repair scaffolds. From a distance, the damage was harder to see. Dock 3 looked like a dark wound cut into the side of the station, but the rest of Sigma orbit still looked strong. Ancient, untouchable, at least it had before Rex Kane came. Now the station carried scars. So did the people aboard it. Jake leaned against the command console with a cup of coffee in one hand. His left arm was wrapped in a medical brace, and there was still dried blood beneath one fingernail that he had somehow missed. Council already sent another request, he said. What kind? Mining colony near the outer corridor. Pirates hit them last month. Local defense fleet disappeared. They want an escort. I looked out through the bridge glass. Did Earth answer? Jake gave a short smile. 3 patrol groups already on the way. That was the thing about humans. Once we decided someone was under our protection, we rarely stopped. The bridge was quiet for a while. Most of the crew were exhausted. Some were sleeping at their stations between shifts. Others sat in silence, staring at damage reports or casualty lists. 23 humans had died defending Sigma orbit. None of us were going to forget their names. The navigation officer finally broke the silence. Entering jump corridor in 4 minutes. Jake nodded. Then he looked at me. You know they're afraid of us now. Yes, you okay with that? I thought about the council chamber. The way delegates had stopped laughing. The way species that had ignored us for years were suddenly asking for treaties, patrols, and military support. Then I thought about the Elion children in the garden beneath the observation dome. I don't care if they're afraid of us, I said quietly. As long as they know we'll come. Jake looked at me for a moment. Then he nodded. The Liberty entered jump space a few minutes later. Stars stretched into white lines. Sigma orbit vanished behind us. Earth was waiting. When we arrived, the debriefings lasted for 3 days. Military intelligence wanted every detail about Kane's fleet. Diplomatic command wanted transcripts from the council. Medical staff wanted to know exactly how long I had remained in predator mode and whether I intended to do it again. I lied to them about that last part. On the 4th day, I finally returned home. My apartment overlooked the northern coast outside New Edinburgh. Grey water, cold wind, cargo ships moving slowly across the horizon. For the first time in weeks, everything was quiet. I made coffee, sat by the window, and tried not to think about smoke-filled corridors and frightened children hiding behind medical beds. The door terminal chimed once. A package had arrived. No sender information. Inside was a small drawing folded carefully into quarters. Sigma orbit. The Liberty. A very inaccurate picture of me holding a rifle larger than my entire body. At the bottom, written in awkward translated standard, were 6 words. "Thank you for protecting us." I stood there holding the drawing for a long time. Then I pinned it to the wall beside the kitchen door. Outside, rain moved in from the sea. My communicator buzzed. Another request for help. Another colony. Another convoy. Another place where someone was afraid. I looked at the drawing one last time before answering. "Mitchell," I said. The voice on the other end sounded nervous. "Ambassador, we were told to contact the humans." I looked out at the dark ocean beyond the window. "Tell me what happened," I said. The distress call came from a colony in the Vesper Reach, a small agricultural world called Talos 4. Population 80,000, mostly miners, refinery workers, cargo crews, and families who had settled there because the system was quiet, remote, and usually ignored by the rest of the galaxy. Quiet systems never stayed quiet for long. The local governor appeared on my screen seconds after I accepted the transmission. He was a narrow, thin, gray-skinned, with tired red eyes and the look of someone who had not slept in days. Behind him, warning lights flashed through a dark command room. "Ambassador Mitchell," he said, "we were told Earth responds to emergency calls." "We do." He swallowed. "There are pirate ships in orbit. Not Kane's people, smaller fleets. But there are many of them." "How many?" 23 confirmed. "Enough. What defenses do you have?" 3 patrol ships, mining lasers, surface batteries that barely work. We moved the children into refinery tunnels beneath the northern ridge. Good. At least people had learned something from Sigma orbit. "When can you get here?" he asked. I looked out through the rain beyond my apartment window. "Soon." The transmission ended. 2 hours later I was aboard the Liberty again. The ship had barely finished repairs from Sigma orbit. Sections of the hull were still mismatched from emergency replacements. One corridor remained open to engineering crews. Half the bridge still smelled faintly of smoke and burned wiring. Nobody complained. Jake Rivers stood beside the tactical display with a steel coffee mug in one hand. The mug had a crack down the side from Sigma orbit. 23 ships, he said. Mostly armed transports, scavenged frigates, converted mining hulls. Nothing impressive. Still enough to wipe out a colony. He nodded. 2 destroyers from Earth Command are moving to meet us. The bridge crew looked tired. Not weak, just tired. Some of them still carried fresh wounds from Sigma orbit. One officer had lost 2 fingers. Another still walked with a limp. The pilot had a burn scar across one side of his neck. Nobody had asked for leave. Nobody had tried to avoid the mission. The navigation officer looked up. "Jump corridor ready." Jake glanced at me. "You know the worst part?" "What?" "These pirates know exactly why the colony called us." He looked back toward the stars outside the bridge. "And they stayed anyway." The Liberty entered jump space. White light swallowed the ship. When we reached Talos 4, the battle had already started. The colony burned below us. Long lines of fire stretched across the surface where pirate ships had struck refineries, power stations, and habitation zones. One orbital platform had already broken apart above the atmosphere, scattering debris across the sky. The pirate fleet turned toward us immediately. 23 ships. Ugly ships. Cheap ships. Desperate ships. Jake studied the tactical display for less than 10 seconds. "Signal the destroyers to cover the planet," he said. "We'll take the pirates." Nobody reacted. It was not bravery. It was routine. The Liberty accelerated directly toward the center of the pirate formation. No speeches. No threats. No negotiations. The first pirate frigate exploded before it completed its turn toward us. The second lost engines, weapons, and atmosphere in the same volley. The rest broke formation immediately. They tried to scatter. They tried to run. Jake watched them across the tactical screen. "See?" he said quietly. "That's what Sigma orbit changed." I looked at him. "They know now." The Liberty cut directly through the center of the pirate line. One ship tried to ram us. We tore it apart with railguns. Another launched boarding torpedoes. We destroyed them before they crossed half the distance. The destroyers arrived 3 minutes later and sealed the escape routes. By the end of the battle, 14 pirate ships had been destroyed. 9 surrendered, not because they were outmatched, because they were afraid. Later, we learned several pirate crews had intercepted footage from Sigma orbit. Kane's fleet burning, boarding teams disappearing into smoke-filled corridors, human volunteers carrying wounded children to safety while pirate bodies piled up around them. Rumors spread quickly through criminal networks. The humans are coming. For most species, that sentence meant rescue. For pirates, it meant something else. Below us, Talos 4 was still burning. But the children hidden beneath the northern ridge were alive. And as the Liberty descended through the atmosphere to begin rescue operations, I realized something had changed across the galaxy. People no longer called Earth because humans were kind. They called because they believed humans would do what nobody else could. And they were right. The surface of Talos 4 looked worse up close. Entire refinery districts were burning. Cargo trains had been derailed across the desert flats. Half the northern spaceport had collapsed inward, leaving twisted metal scattered across kilometers of scorched ground. Human rescue teams moved through the wreckage in armored transports. Medics, engineers, Marines. No speeches, no flags, just work. I stepped off the transport beside Jake Rivers near what remained of the colony command center. The local governor was waiting for us. He looked older than he had during the transmission. Shock did that to people. We lost almost 2,000, he said quietly. If you had arrived an hour later. He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. Jake looked toward the smoke rising over the colony. Where are the children? Still in the tunnels. Good. The governor hesitated for a second. Some of the pirates escaped. Jake nodded. We know. They'll come back someday. I looked at the burning horizon. No, I said. They won't. By nightfall, rescue operations had stabilized the colony. Fires were under control. Emergency shelters had been established. Human engineers were already rebuilding power grids and water systems. Marines patrolled the outskirts of the settlement in pairs, rifles hanging low against their armor. The children finally came out of the tunnels after sunset. Dozens of them. Dirty, frightened, exhausted, but alive. One little boy stopped beside me as families were moved toward the emergency shelters. Are you human? He asked. Yes. He looked up at the Marines standing near the transport vehicles. My dad said pirates are afraid of humans now. I glanced toward the dark desert beyond the colony. Some of them are. The boy thought about that for a moment. Good, he said. Then he walked away. Later that night, I stood outside the command center and watched the stars above Talos 4. Wreckage from the battle still burned high in orbit like artificial meteors. Jake stepped out beside me with 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to me. You ever think about how strange this is? He asked. What? That people trust us now. I looked at the lights of the emergency shelters across the colony. Families sleeping in temporary camps. Children finally safe enough to close their eyes. They don't trust us, I said quietly. They trust what happens when we decide someone matters. Jake drank his coffee in silence. Far above us, one of the destroyers moved across the sky. A dark shape against the stars. Watching, protecting, waiting. The galaxy had spent decades seeing humans as soft, friendly, harmless. Now they were starting to understand something else. Humans were friendly because we chose to be. We were kind because we had enough strength to afford kindness. And if anyone threatened the people under our protection, we became something very different. Something pirates whispered about across damaged ships and criminal outposts. Something warlords and raiders now feared more than fleets or armies. The moment when humans arrived. By the end of the month, 3 more colonies had requested human protection fleets. 2 pirate groups surrendered without a fight the moment Earth patrol ships entered their sectors. One criminal network abandoned an entire station after intercepting a rumor that the Liberty was on its way. At the next council session, nobody laughed when humans spoke. Nobody called us weak. Nobody called us soft. General Vorn stood beside me near the chamber entrance as delegates filed past in silence. You know, he said, there was a time when the galaxy believed humans were prey. I looked through the great station window at the stars beyond Sigma orbit. What do they believe now? I asked. Vorn watched the distant patrol ships moving through the dark. That when humans protect something, he said quietly, they stop being human. And that frightens everyone.